Jason Grillo with AirMiners. Pleasure to see you all here. Music of Carly Commando, Every Day is the name of the song. And because every day we are thinking about trust and communicating integrity in voluntary carbon markets, which are where most of our carbon removal solutions are finding themselves today. Wanted to take a minute and go through logistics and talk about why we're having this meeting. As I just mentioned, how we think about voluntary carbon markets are the mainstay of where most carbon removal solutions are going to find themselves over the next several years. At least that's our projection here in AirMiners and among our AirMiners team. And we want to understand how we can communicate ways of being a trustworthy, credible seller of carbon removal credits in voluntary carbon markets with integrity. This year in particular has seen a variety of reports about carbon markets as they have existed to date, primarily with avoidance credits and other methods outside of carbon removal that might affect the way that we communicate carbon removal to people who would be ultimately customers of companies that are offering solutions in our space. Again, nothing wrong with, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with renewable energy or avoiding emissions to begin with. Rather, it's the trust and integrity that we want to unlock as a carbon removal space that makes us distinct from the way carbon markets have operated in the past. And that's the heart of what we're going to get to today. To that end, we're going to have our typical hour-long meeting with Q&A starting in about 45 minutes or so. Varsha Ramesh is at Offstream is going to be our moderator, and I'll hand the floor to her in a second. Please mute yourselves and until it's time for Q&A. When that time comes up, we will start in on questions that you can ask of the panel in the chat, and we will go from there. Then we'll continue to record this. We'll stop the recording at the top of the hour and then have a half an hour of networking post-meeting so that we can all get to know each other, not just know of each other. So, and I would be remiss not to mention the work done prior to this event by 3 individuals in particular in our community who approached me saying, hey, we'd love to do an event like this. In particular, I want to single out Carolyn Guntenke, Mike Suppresso, and Tank Chen of our AirMiners community. So thank you to the 3 of you for helping make this event possible, for bringing up the possibility of making this happen, and for doing legwork on the back end to help organize. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Without further ado, I want to hand the floor over to Varsha Ramesh at Offstream so that we can have an introduction to the panel and to start off the program. Varsha.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you. A quick intro on me before I introduce our panelists introduce themselves. My name is Varsha. I've worked across the carbon markets for almost 5 years now. Started my carbon market journey at Indigo Ag. Spent some time at Patch, and most recently actually started a company that helps early stage CDR companies navigate third-party certification in the various kind of ultra manual and sometimes opaque aspects of the standards landscape. So I care a lot about this topic, and I'm very excited to introduce our panelists today. Leila, do you want to kick us off?
Thanks so much, Varsha, and thank you, Jason and the AirMiners team. I'm Leila Toplic. I'm at Carbonfuture. As a way of introduction, I spent 22 years in tech sector, half of which I actually spent at Microsoft, and the rest at social enterprises, startups, and NGOs. I joined Carbonfuture 6 months ago. Prior to coming to Carbonfuture, I worked on trustworthy AI, and specifically AI for climate adaptation, which included climate smart agriculture, predicting and preventing deforestation, and also anticipatory action or disaster response. My background is at the intersection of technology, ethics, specifically digital trust, and communications, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Really pleased to be with you here today. Thanks, Varsha, and thank you, AirMiners. So I'm Lisa Woodward, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Climate Agency. We're a non-profit marketing and communications consultancy, 100% specialized in climate startups, so helping climate startups to scale, working with a variety of different solutions from nature-based to more technical, direct air capture, etc. So in terms of background, what brought me here, so my co-founder, Siv Gallo, and I both have long corporate careers in marketing and business roles, as well as NGOs roles. And we've been bringing that knowledge to climate startups for the last 15 months, which is when we set up the Climate Agency. And we work with those companies to help them define their messaging that's going to resonate with their target audiences and to plan their stakeholder strategy. And inevitably, trust plays an enormous part of that. So I'm very much looking forward to being part of this panel. It's a very important topic, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts on how to communicate trust.
Ted, do you want to round us out?
Perfect. Yes. Well, firstly, yeah, thank you, Jason and the AirMiners team for bringing us all together. And I think a great job they do in bringing the wider community together. So thank you for that. Yeah, so my name is Ted Christie-Miller. I'm Director of Carbon Removal at the carbon credit ratings agency, BeZero Carbon. My background's really in the policy world. So I founded and led the climate program at a think tank here in London called Onward, where we did a lot of work on industrial decarbonisation and future tech innovation. I joined BeZero about 2 years ago to lead the engineered carbon removal team. For those that don't know, BeZero is a global carbon credit ratings agency. So think of S&P and Moody's in financial markets, but for the voluntary carbon market. And yeah, my team really is a research ratings and partnerships team, really focused on the engineered removal sector. So everything from direct air capture to bioenergy carbon capture and storage to enhanced rock weathering, biochar, all that suite of engineered solutions.
Thank you, Ted. Excited to have you all here. And I think would like to start the discussion off with a kind of just setting the scene of like how we're talking about this broadly. And so a question for all of our panelists is like, based on what you're seeing in your day-to-day, especially like in 2023 and the back half of the year now, how are you seeing industry leaders, the carbon credit buyers, or kind of the demand side of the voluntary carbon market grappling with this perceived lack of trust?
Shall I maybe I could kick us off? Yeah, so we are, as I said, we're a global carbon credit ratings agency. So we've rated over 360 carbon credits to date. Bit of context to where we sit might give you some context for the answer to this question. Our rating was basically developed by our founders who came from financial markets, and they saw that there was this core market failure in the voluntary carbon market, which was this lack of correlation between price and quality. And so they developed the BeZero carbon rating, which is essentially our opinion on the likelihood that a carbon credit returns a ton of carbon removed or avoided. And with that, we're able to evaluate any project anywhere in the world under any methodology. Over 360 projects rated, over 50 full-time carbon credit scientists, and we have a rating scale that goes from AAA, so highest likelihood, down to D, which is lowest likelihood. And so when we're looking at how industry leaders are grappling with this perceived lack of trust, our analysis does resonate that the matter of the fact of the market is that the majority of credits are in the higher risk categories. They are poorer credits, and they have poor additionality in some cases, poor overcrediting risk in some cases. There's some that have high risk of non-permanence, and there is a wide spectrum of quality in the market, and it has caused stickiness in the wider voluntary carbon market, I'd say, over the last year, and we've seen demand sort of slow down a bit as well. And I think what we see is that is in part because of the false commodification of this market. There's been this assumption that a ton is a ton, and then the reputational risk comes when whoever it might be The Guardian, it might be anyone that's doing an investigation, shows that some of these credits aren't ton is not a ton, and that sort of false commodification has been a bit of an issue. And I think the way in which people are trying to sort this out and to try and mitigate some of that reputational risk is, I kind of view it twofold. So first is trying to double down on the commodification route and look for certain sort of pass-fail categories, certain labels that help to show that is a good carbon credit. You know, you've got the work that we've seen from Corsia, we've got the work we've seen from the ICVCM, for instance, that have sort of pushed that and are sort of trying to boost integrity that way. You know, we have a slightly different approach. We have carbon credit ratings, so I think that's sort of the other way people are looking to tackle this. Carbon credit ratings reflect that wide variation in quality across the market, and in our view is the most robust way to assess carbon credits, to basically be able to price risk, to show that there is a spectrum of quality, and even if you put the bar as higher than it is now, there will still be a huge variation in quality, because it's never simple enough to say a ton is always a ton. Let's just look at this call here. We've got a direct air capture credit, and we're trying to compare it to a let's say an avoided deforestation credit. Wildly different things that are very, very different in many ways. And so saying that both can represent exactly the same thing, I think is potentially challenging. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm happy to build on that. So just defining this problem space and focusing specifically on carbon removal credit buyers is just stating that not all carbon removal is of high quality, as Ted mentioned, durability or verifiability. So the outcome of that is the companies are concerned about their reputation and financial risks. So what we've done at Carbonfuture is to build a trust infrastructure specifically for durable carbon removal. And before I share more about what that infrastructure consists of, similar to Ted, let me talk about how we actually think about trust in carbon removal. So in the carbon removal industry, we believe that trust is achieved through the combined efforts on one end, the organizations that are responsible for setting the rules. So that would be independent third-party standards like BCS, Gold Standard, Puro, and those also overseeing the processes. So those would be independent auditors. And then on the other end, having the robust monitoring, reporting, and verification system. Now, when these are combined, they ensure quality, verifiability, and reliability in carbon markets. So our Carbonfuture trust infrastructure consists of Carbonfuture MRV Plus, which is the most comprehensive MRV in the durable durable carbon removal market, and I'm happy to talk more about that later. And then on the other end, we have Carbonfuture Marketplace, which provides access to portfolios of durable carbon removal credits to corporate buyers. Maybe also for those of you who are not familiar with MRV, what monitoring, reporting, verification systems are, they prove that carbon removals are accurately quantified, they're additional, and the carbon is stored for the long term. So think of it as a lot of data collection, monitoring, and also reporting. What this means in the context of Carbonfuture is that we provide buyers with a transparent end-to-end look through of every step in the carbon removal journey.
Thanks, Leila. And yeah, I'm excited to talk more about the trust protocol in a little bit. Maybe we can start with you again, just like when you're, how do you work with, or how can smaller carbon removal suppliers like work with you to navigate this landscape? And what are like the practical steps that they should be taking maybe at early, like years 0 through 4 of their journey, or maybe 4 to 5 years to invest in MRV, but recognize that it's like one of many priorities they're trying to juggle?
Yeah, that's a great question. The MRV Plus consists of 3 components. So it's not just carbon removal tracking once your project is ready to be tracked, but we actually go all the way upstream, just recognizing that we need large supply. Suppliers need a lot of support when it comes to just getting their projects ready to be even tracked. So we have a component of our MRV Plus that is focusing on providing suppliers with various services. So for example, we know that one of the pain points is certification support. So we help suppliers navigate the voluntary carbon market and find the most suitable carbon removal standard and methodology for their CDR project. We also help them de-risk certification by proactively actually surfacing and addressing barriers to certification before they even have the project to be tracked. We help them gain the understanding of the projected costs and also timelines associated with certification for any given methodology. And then we also provide some of the carbon market insights that can help inform and validate business models. Now, that's for those that actually have methodologies. There are also companies that are working on new carbon removal approaches that don't yet have validated methodologies. And we have a program that's called Catalyst that provides guidance on MRV and certification. We help suppliers understand some of the key trends in carbon removal market, validate pricing assumptions to help structure their financial models. And then we have a community that they can tap into, the community of some of the key stakeholders in carbon removal market, which would include standard scientists, policymakers, and buyers. So again, this happens early on, and the focus is really on quality and transparency from the get-go. And then the next step would be due diligence, and then actually getting to carbon removal tracking and verification.
Thank you, that's helpful. And Ted, will you share a little bit about how you see BeZero helping with the same pain point? And also maybe, can you speak to how you're seeing this information, like if you can link it to ways you're seeing trust in the market? Like, is this helping? Are ratings helping? Is this transparency helping?
Yes, of course. So in terms of our products, it's probably worth just deviating between the two. To date, we've really been focused on the ex-post market. So all of our credit ratings that are public, all of our public online ratings are all for ex-post credits. The vast majority of that is in the avoidance market, and the ones that are removals, most of them are nature-based removals. We've just released our first biochar rating, and we've got a few more engineered removals coming down the track as well. But really, the big innovation we've been focused on for the last 6 months, which is most applicable here, is our ex-ante credit rating. So what that evaluates is essentially our ex-post rating. So it's carbon risk with information risk. And then the new thing we're building in is project execution risk. So what we're essentially doing here is stripping out some of the due diligence process you often get from big investors or growth equity investors and plugging it into the rating to allow us to look at projects in the future. And so I think when talking about for the smaller carbon removal suppliers and how they can navigate this landscape, I really think that is an interesting tool at the disposal, because what we're seeing, and I spoke to a ocean alkalinity enhancement a developer just a couple of weeks ago, is they're doing their seed round or Series A, I can't remember which one it is, and they want to basically build in a ratings report into that process. So what it basically does is allows an investor to be able to understand within the market context, because you can see how the rating looks within the market, exactly what our opinion on the likelihood is of that carbon credit returning a ton of carbon removed or avoided. And initially for the ex-ante rating, which is slightly different to what we did with ex-post, it is a private ratings report using privately available information. A lot of that is because we are using quite sensitive intellectual property often with some of these developers. And so that private ratings report can sort of be used as a part of that process. So I really do think it's a powerful tool to be able to get that trust from investors in the landscape. And as we look to scale the market, I really think it's going to be integral to moving beyond the kind of startup climate leadership that we've seen from the likes of Shopify and Stripe. What we want to do is move from that to the next phase. We want to go from the marketing budget to the treasury budget, and really unlock some of that project finance from some of those big institutional investors. And they understand credit ratings. We have built this model in a very similar way to the financial ratings agencies, and so I think that language and the way in which we do it is sort of useful for that. So that's the first thing to say, just on how we can help startups. I think ex-ante ratings can be really, really useful. In terms of,
did you want to jump in really quickly?
Oh, I just wanted to add something, because I think this is important for everyone to understand, is like some of these signals of quality that are important for this next wave of buyers that also don't have large science teams and due diligence teams on staff. We need due diligence, we need MRV, we need rating in order to provide them with the tools to have the confidence in carbon removal. So just bringing together what Ted is talking about and also what Carbonfuture is working on.
Exactly, and I'll just follow that. I mean, we can't do our job if the likes of Carbonfuture don't do theirs. So at the end of the day, the MRV is sort of a crucial part of this puzzle. I did a report with Kita, the insurer, earlier this year, where we sort of laid out that we see there's 3 parts of this that need to be sorted out, and it's the MRV, the insurance, and the ratings, just as has happened in the bond market, if we're going to scale it. And so I think we really want to work with the likes of Carbonfuture to help secure some of that trust. Just your second part of the question, Varsha, on how we see this like new way of risk analysis and information in the market shifting the market and how it's adapting to it. What we've done is some analysis showing that since we basically unveiled the rating to now, using marketplace data and pricing data, we're starting to see from a baseline where there's no correlation between price and quality, we're starting to see it align over time, and that's sort of the impact of the rating in real life. So that's particularly exciting for us, and I think when we've got a couple of years of data to show, it'll be really impactful, and hopefully over time you then start to fix that market failure that we sought out to fix.
That is really energizing, and I'm excited to hear about that data. Let's say, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit. So let's say like I'm an early stage CDR company. I'm doing what I can. I'm working on MRV. I'm like getting the reporting together to get a third-party rating. While all of that's happening, which can often still take on the order of months or potentially a year, as I scale from like demonstration or pilot scale onwards, how should I communicate? Like, how should we communicate what we're doing to potential buyers to increase their trust? Like, what are some of the narratives that we should be painting? And maybe Lisa, we can start with you, as this is very much your specialty.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, absolutely. So Ted and Leila have done a good job here of sort of talking about some of the technicalities and tools for demonstrating integrity. But as a sort of communications expert, I look at it at another angle, because you need to build your integrity and have everything in place. But then you need to communicate messages that are actually going to really resonate with your buyers. And in this case, we're talking mainly about corporate leaders. So, I wish I had a magic wand. I don't, which is why the climate agency exists. But essentially, what we do when we're working with our clients is we sort of get them to remove themselves, sort of step away from the detail of what they're doing. So an early stage project actually really needs to sort of get the big picture and sort of step into their stakeholders' shoes. So step into the shoes of the corporate leader and really have a think about actually what do they really care about? What are they motivated by? What do they need? What do they need to hear from you to have that sense of trust? The integrity part of it is absolutely crucial, because every project has a responsibility to the whole sector to have integrity. But in terms of communication, those corporate leaders might not always respond that well to sort of all the sort of detail and data that you may have as a project starting out. So we were quite lucky with some of our clients. We've been able to interview some of their clients or potential clients and find out actually what some of these heads of sustainability at global corporates want. And they told us a couple of things. First of all, they're saying, they want to look good. So actually, how can you, with your project, make them look good? So it's sort of tapping into their sustainability objectives. You know, how can you make them come across as good citizens? And of course, the whole sort of reputational risk is, you know, is very top of mind. You know, they don't want to take risk for the organization. And right now, there's a lot of media out there, you know, creating a lot of uncertainty and giving that perceived risk. So that really needs to be addressed. You know, additionality, permanence, community disruption, etc. And the other thing they said is, like, you know, while you're helping us get around that, you need to do it in a way that's really simple. So, you know, there's a tendency for us in this sector to sort of talk in, you know, there's a lot of jargon in this sector, and there's a, you know, a lot of details and a lot of fact. But when you're talking to corporate leaders, they need things simplified. So even if you're talking to a head of sustainability, you still need to make their job easy, because they've probably got to get sign off from someone else. So, you know, corporates have different agendas, they're very busy. How do you make it easy for them? And some of the things, you know, that the climate agency, we sort of suggest to our clients, there's a few things that you can do when you're sort of communicating. Is one is to sort of position your project as part of a portfolio of projects. So, you know, in classic sort of commercial marketing, you know, it'd be all about, oh, my, you know, USP, unique selling proposition. Why am I better than this person? Why is my solution the best? But in climate, we don't need to do that. There's a great big pie out there, and there's plenty of pie for everybody to have a slice. So actually, it can be quite useful to talk about operating as a portfolio, because obviously for the corporate, that means that the risk is being spread. Another idea, and if I think back to my own sort of corporate days, you know, I wasn't buying carbon removal because it was so long ago, but, you know, I would be now. So if I was back in my shoes, you know, when I was in that world, how would I have gone about it, and how would have I felt? I would have been very worried about risk, and I would have wanted to, you know, absolutely know that all the, you know, the MRV is in place, etc. But actually, would I have understood any of that? You know, I'm not a technical person. I wouldn't have understood that. So again, you know, I can be shown all that data, but I'd probably still be very nervous. But something you can do, and it's really useful for very early startups, is to position your project as a pilot. And that's something that's done quite a lot in other sectors, like in public health, where you know, as me going to my board to sell in something, is I go, okay, we've got this pilot, we want to buy into it. It's a test and learn. So, you know, we hope we're going to achieve this, that, and the other, but it is test and learn. So, you know, the risk to the organization's reputation is slightly less. Other things that you can do are, you know, look at, you know, maybe issuing a white paper about your particular approach, and why your solution is good from a corporate point of view. So very much using their language, very simplified. You can even look at, you know, partnering with somebody, you know, that's already in the sustainability world, but that's come from the corporate world, because people trust people at the end of the day. So if, you know, I'm sitting there in my corporate seat, if somebody else who's sat in my seat is writing, or, you know, just co-authoring the introduction of a paper, that could be, you know, quite interesting to me. And then there's sort of the usual trust badges that we would sort of recommend in, you know, any kind of communication principles, not just climate. It's, you know, have you got case studies? Have you got testimonials from clients? So obviously, the early stage, you might not have those, but what other proof do you have that you're doing what you're doing? So if you're doing a nature-based solution and you're working with a community, show that, you know, have testimonials from those communities, or show photos of, you know, your team being operational with those communities, you know, make it come to life. At the end of the day, pictures speak 1,000 words, and our brains process, you know, images much quicker than we do, you know, facts and figures. Again, you know, if you're early stage and, you know, you don't have much of this, you can also show any awards you've got, any accreditations. Have you got partners or supporters already on board? Any institutions that, you know, really add to your credibility? If you're being supported by an organization or institution that's well recognized and has good credibility, then that credibility sort of will rub off on you. But essentially, it is, the key takeout, I would say, is get in your target audience's shoes and think about what they need and lead your communication from that. And then, of course, go into the data because you need to show it, but you tap into their needs and it will resonate better with them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really love that theme of simplify it for the stakeholder, but in a way that's, supported by a lot of transparent data. And I think that's tricky, especially because we're so early. We don't often know we don't often know all the questions a potential carbon credit buyer or stakeholders might want to know. And it's a little bit a guessing game where, you share some, you get some in return. So it's helpful to kind of hear some of the very tangible ways to instill trust that you mentioned at the end there, Lisa. I wanted to quickly, Leila, come to you about the concept of the trust framework. And my specific question is, you mentioned earlier, right, signals matter, signals are helpful. And you highlighted pre-purchase agreements from Frontier perhaps, or generally, I think we can accept that pre-purchase agreements from some select group of CDR buyers can be helpful, but that can also be kind of hard. There are only a few of those well-established signals right now. So what can companies do if they're trying to communicate the transparency, but in a very simple way? And how does the trust framework from Carbonfuture help with that? Does it simplification to some extent for the buyer?
Yeah, so just I want to pick up on that question, and also one of the questions in the chat window, and I'll try to be brief. One, the trust infrastructure that we built is a set of products that on one end provide transparency and signals of quality, on the other end enable buyers to act on their corporate sustainability plans through the portfolios of durable carbon removal. This all the work that we do at Carbonfuture is guided by something that is called trust framework. It's basically definition of, there are 5 dimensions of how we define trust that include also transparency and quality, but also innovation and impact, environmental and community impact, and collaboration, because it takes the whole ecosystem to actually build this industry. And we've got 17 criteria that we use to really measure and audit the work we do, and a number of proof points that are attached to each criteria. So really, how do we operationalize trust? And one thing that I didn't mention earlier in the conversation is that I wear 2 hats at Carbonfuture. I'm the Chief Trust Officer, but also Chief Communications Officer. So I get to both think about what is required to build trust, what does trust look like in carbon removal, and then how do we communicate that? One of the things that I really want to touch on, which is important, and I think related to one of the questions in the chat window, is understanding some of the pain points that buyers are facing, and not just necessarily the early wave of buyers that are potentially ready to invest in risk and help build the market, but also the next wave, which would actually be required in order to get this market to the climate relevancy. So, and also to Lisa's point, meeting them where they are. So recognizing, and I was just in the New York Climate Week, that many of the chief sustainability officers are not yet thinking about carbon removal and don't have information about carbon removal, don't know how to even think about that in the context of their sustainability plans. But let me just quickly summarize some of the key points that are related to the buyer concerns that it's helpful for this group to understand, and then build communications around, in addition to obviously building the product to address that. So one is around reputational and also financial risk. The other one is related to, and we've already talked about that, the other one is related to carbon removal project quality. So this is where transparency and also signals of quality are key. But then there's also another one that we haven't talked about, which is like carbon market imperfections. And that comes down to uncertainty around availability and the prices in carbon removal markets. So when you take some of these key pain points that the buyers are facing, I'll set aside the kind of the readiness for the compliance market, including reporting. But so when you take that, the communication really needs to center on, in a simple way, as Lisa noted, talking about what is it that buyers could actually do. So number one is invest in high durability technologies. Number two, insist on comprehensive transparency. And this is where monitoring, reporting, and verification systems can help, because they provide that data, that transparency, that look through. Third, prioritize verified and certified carbon removal credits. So for example, we don't sell what we don't verify, what's not verified in the Carbonfuture, through Carbonfuture MRV Plus. And then lastly, the reason to get started now and to front load their net zero commitment is threefold. One is supply, staying ahead of the future demand by ensuring reliable supply of carbon removal, especially as demand intensifies. There was a recent BCG, Boston Consulting Group study that estimated demand about 40 million to 200 million tons of durable CDR by 2030. And at the same time, this demand will not be met by the forecasted supply, which is about 13 or 15 to 32 million tons. So it's important to get in early to secure some of this supply. Second is around pricing. Lock in access to reliable pricing. That's another reason to start now. And then third is around regulations. So gaining experience with carbon removal before the regulations take effect. So again, starting with the pain points, meeting them where they are, and then talking about what can be done and what systems and tools exist for them to actually take action.
Thanks, Leila. I realize in hearing a little bit of what you're sharing, we've talked a lot about like how to pitch yourself to a carbon credit buyer, but there are often a lot of stakeholders that early stage carbon removal companies need to pitch themselves or just communicate themselves to. So Lisa, can you get maybe just from your vantage point in your role, like give us the really quick high level, like who are the different stakeholders you've seen companies be thinking about? How should they communicate with them? And then Ted, if you wanted to jump in right after, feel free. I saw you unmuted for a second.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the buyers, but obviously startups need a lot of stakeholders to get things rolling. And at the Climate Agency, we sort of actually get people to map out all their stakeholders, and then we focus on the priority stakeholders for right now to get you to the next stage, because often there's many that you're going to need along the journey, but you've got to start at the beginning of the journey before you worry about the ones later. And then, what we see often is people will, create a pitch deck as a fundamental, piece of, collateral, and that's really important. But that is often the same thing. And, I think, what you need to do is really look at each stakeholder and look at their needs. So if we're talking about, corporate leaders, their needs are about, reducing perceived risk and making themselves look good in line with their own objectives. What are the needs of other stakeholders? And that's what you should be leading with in your pitches. And it might be in terms of trust badges, you have to dial up certain ones for different organizations. So, you've got your buyers, you've got your investors, you've got grant organizations. I've come across some climate startups where that you need to go through sort of engineering advisory firms to reach the end customer. So what do they actually need? Because for them it might be more about having an extra tool in the box, or adding to their own sort of USP. So the key message really is your pitch should always start with meeting the needs of the specific stakeholder you're talking to, and then the rest should flow from there.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that's so fair, and often takes a little extra legwork, but is worth it. Ted, did you want to jump in on the trust and communication point here?
Yeah, it was just when we're talking about how do corporates navigate against the reputational risk. I would say this, but just buy high quality credits. We have more than 360 credit ratings out there. We have all of the in-depth analysis that underlies that. in my view, it really is the best way to ensure that you can minimize that risk. The whole way we approach it is evaluating the risk of those carbon credits, and that ties directly into the reputational and potentially future regulatory risk that comes with that.
Yeah, I wish there were more potential buyers on this call. Maybe there are. I would assume it's mostly folks on the supply side who probably agree with you, but I'm with you. Last question, kind of before we hand it to audience Q&A, is just if maybe Ted, you can actually kick us off here. Just tell us a little about how you see the role of external standards bodies like Integrity Council on Voluntary Carbon Markets, government, I guess maybe touch on EU versus UK, and UN Article 6 will play in this next chapter of moving towards higher trust.
Yeah, sure. So we operate in a market where it's sort of spaghetti soup of different organizations that are trying to bring standardization to this. And I think all play important roles, I think, in this to an extent. So obviously registries are a key part of this, and I sort of put the MRV roles within that as well, like what Carbonfuture are doing. And I think overseeing that methodology creation, overseeing some of that carbon auditing, bringing those credits to market is really important. But with that in mind, for us, the key thing here is disclosure and transparency. And we always say this to developers and crucially to registries. We want to see as much disclosure as possible. We've got our disclosure guidelines on our website. You can go and see exactly what our bar is to make a credit rateable. A lot of credits in this market are unrateable, even the ex-post ones, and that is because there is just not enough disclosure at the moment. And we see sort of new entrants into the market, like Isometric, for instance, that are really doubling down on this transparency and disclosure point. And I think that's a really positive move. And I think just really push that across the market, have as much disclosure as is feasibly possible from the registry side. Secondly, you mentioned the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, not to be confused with the Voluntary Carbon Markets Initiative. Yeah, I mean, for those that might not be aware, this is a group that has been pushing what they're calling the core carbon principles, and we've been advising them along the way, and we're very much aligned with them on the disclosure and transparency which they push forward, but frankly we have a slightly different view, I think, of the market. I think they set a really good boundary for sort of what is acceptable within the market, but essentially it's another binary market that's being created. It's another pass-fail mechanism, which my concern is that if we sort of go down that route and that sort of recommodification of the market with that view, is that it won't take long for a journalist to show that, look, 2 of these credits are not equal to a ton, and so I think the very outlook that you can have a ton as a ton is misguided and is just going to stifle growth in the market, in my view. So I think they're a really important role in transparency and setting a bottom bar, but I crucially think ratings are an important layer on top to allow us to price and manage that risk. Lastly, I think you mentioned the government's an increasingly important role in enforcing disclosure requirements across the market, I think. And as we drift towards compliance markets and that integration, I mean, you can see it in the US, in the EU, in the UK, in Japan. We're seeing more and more of these engineered removal credits that are being contemplated for these markets. And so I think they will play a really important role in ensuring the standards for monitoring, reporting, and verification, for whether ratings are in there, really setting the boundaries to allow that integration into those markets to succeed. And we don't want a repeat of the CDM integration into the EU emissions trading scheme. We really want to make it work this time. And so I think really having sort of robust mechanisms to allow us to monitor that, I think will be really important.
Yeah, that's we definitely don't want a repeat of CDM and ETS. So fair, Ted. A follow-up from the audience as you were kind of talking about disclosures, and I think we can kind of move to Q&A after this, is like if you have published or if you have a very simple list of disclosures that I mean, simple is tough, but like list of disclosures you'd like to see from early stage carbon removal companies that they can use as their North Star, or kind of high level list you could share now with some details on where they can look to get the more detailed roadmap.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got our guidelines for this data disclosure on our website. So I'm just putting the link in now so you can have a look. One thing I would flag is for those developers that are quite early stage and don't have ex post, which is probably every developer on this call. I imagine maybe there's some biochar out there. This is really for our ex post credit ratings. We're talking about when we're looking at ex ante ratings, because we're often using quite sensitive intellectual property. We will be feeding in private information, and that is just a key part of what you have to do when you're looking at these credits ahead of time. So the disclosure is really what I'm talking about for that public ex post market. If you're interested in the ex ante side, there's we can explore and just get in touch if you want to discuss.
Maybe just to add, Varsha, and also build on something that Ted said. Since we didn't mention, we talked about MRV systems, but the kind of two key things to also recognize is that only digital MRV systems will provide the level of transparency and the type of data and also the efficiency that helps us scale. So it is really important to ensure that these MRV systems are digital and that they're able to collect the data on carbon removal, on project locations, and storage evidence, on custodian, provide the level of transparency around accountability among the removal suppliers, and really track the whole value chain. So really emphasizing the value of data, but also digital that can provide that look through and do it in an efficient way that simplifies it, where you actually have automated reporting, which saves time for the suppliers.
Good flag, Leila. I think also a few months ago, or maybe it was weeks, there was a digital MRV panel. I know Linda, I see you on the call, asked a couple questions about that, and we could open the can of worms of how many gaps there are in that part of the value chain right now. But I will acknowledge that that's something people are working on. Grant Faber asked a question earlier, and I think it's a really interesting one that I'm curious, Ted and Leila, if you're willing to jump in, and then Lisa, if you have any other thoughts, maybe less relevant. But he asked, like, how can we structure the business models of entities focusing on MRV or insurance or ratings to prevent kind of a race to the bottom in terms of integrity? So I was curious if you guys have thoughts on that topic, and if you're willing to share how especially maybe Carbonfuture, like what is your business model when it comes to MRV, and how are you thinking about integrity and avoiding the erosion of standards?
I'll just briefly touch on this, and happy to follow up since we have about 10 minutes. So as mentioned earlier, the way we define trust is actually having the organizations like standards that actually set the rules, the quality rules, and also having those that oversee the processes, and then MRV separate. So we are an intermediary. We are between those who provide carbon removal methods and the organizations that verify these methods. And this is key for ensuring that we are keeping decision makers separate from those who benefit, and that we have the right incentive structures. So I'll pause on this, and Ted, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the whole point of ratings is essentially to stop the race to the bottom. It's not a binary. It's not a binary certification. We have AAA down to D, and so the best quality credits are rewarded in like by the rating. So I see it as a crucial tool to basically stop that race to the bottom. I think the problem with saying like everything above this mark is a ton, is then you have a scenario where everyone wants to get the very cheapest credits that are above that mark, and so you then have a race to the bottom. I think ratings is almost the opposite. You have a race to the top.
Do either of you, or Lisa, do you have any thoughts on for companies that are newer to the market, so they're not Carbonfuture or BeZero, but they're thinking about ways to avoid conflicts of interest or misaligned incentives? Like, what would you like to see in their business models?
Was that to me, or was it to
it was an open question. If you have thoughts, Ted, would love to hear them, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have that much to add on that. I think
No worries.
often I do just circle back to, if you have the right levels of disclosure, the market will adjust to what they know. Like information is good, essentially. So I think try as much where possible to be as transparent as possible.
Perfect. Fair. Easier said, I mean, not easier said than done, but takes a lot of time and effort, but worthwhile. Should be done. Do folks have other questions that they wanted to unmute and ask? If not, there's, I think, a couple more in the chat. I'm happy to.
There's a little bit of backlog. And by the way, totally I agree. Simple does not always mean easy.
Yeah. Thank
So,
you, Jason.
yeah.
Thanks for reframing that.
Yep. Carolyn, looks like you had something that you wanted to unmute and ask.
Yeah, exactly. But my question was, assuming I was a huge corporate buyer, how would I navigate the complex landscape? So I think, yeah, and which criteria should I consider when choosing credits or programs? So I think Leila, in the meantime, responded partly to that question, actually. But yeah, if one of you wanted to summarize again, because I think it's really even confusing for those having been in the CDR bubble for quite a while. So just imagine corporate buyers that approach this topic and know it's kind of still voluntary. What were the top 3 things you would recommend to take care of?
Maybe I'll jump in on that. So, I mean, you're completely right. It is very complex and a lot of words that are alien to many corporate buyers. And so that is, I mean, at the end of the day, why bringing it together as a headline rating is sort of useful for a market mechanism. But what underlies that is broadly sort of 3 categories. For us, the core thing is additionality. So looking at the investment analysis, looking at the role of carbon credit finance in that project going ahead. The second sort of pillar really is carbon accounting. So there we're looking at over-crediting risk, we're looking at leakage risk. And then the third pillar is non-permanence risk. So the likelihood that the ton of carbon removed remains so for the time committed. So those are the things that I think people really should be focusing on broadly, and yeah, that feeds in exactly to how we do the rating.
I'm happy to summarize what I said earlier. So durable carbon removal, comprehensive transparency through digital MRV and ratings, and then really prioritizing verified and certified carbon removal credits that have undergone rigorous third-party validation.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I was going to say, Helen from BeZero was not able to unmute, unfortunately, but had a really interesting question about what for those who don't know, BeZero is a carbon crediting program for durable carbon removal, and what does the panel think that she said what we can do better? How can we help the industry? By the we, I'm assuming she meant BeZero. So any comments you have on that?
I can go first. Helen, great question. I'm also thrilled that Carbonfuture is working very closely with BeZero as of recently. I think we just need to do a lot more education and communication around what matters, what quality and transparency looks like, and also instilling that sense of urgency on the part of corporate buyers to get started now. And I shared some of the kind of reasons to get started in terms of price and supply and regulations and so on. So collectively, we need to kind of get outside of our own CDR bubble and bring kind of the next wave of corporate buyers, and at the same time also engage with the policymakers and get to the point of government national level procurement to get this market to be climate relevant. Lisa or Ted, anything from you?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think disclosure again. So yeah, I'd love to see BeZero publish project design documents, monitoring reports, validation reports. It would make our jobs a lot easier because we'd then be able to rate the credits. So yeah, I think as much disclosure as possible.
Yeah, and the same, to sound like a broken record as well. You know, when we're talking to, you know, people like corporates about, you know, to bring in the urgency, it's again sort of using language that the corporates would use as well, so that it sort of really taps into, you know, their own motivations and their own, you know, objectives and goals that they have to meet.
All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. Varsha, anything to add to this, or?
No, I mean, I think we heard a lot about like what the demand side of this world is thinking about, like ways companies can start to get kind of start to take small steps towards creating more trust. And I think there are a lot of resources. We heard a lot of resources that folks can pay attention to, whether it's like using BeZero ratings as kind of a North Star or a guidepost for how to communicate your science, or just like focusing on having really simple, distinct kind of vignettes about what you're working on from Lisa. And then very excited about all the development Carbonfuture is doing to make this kind of early certification as seamless as possible. So I think, you know, good early steps for folks to take. And if they have questions, I think, Jason, you dropped everyone's emails in the chat box. Very happy to continue the conversation. And I really believe in transparency and disclosure as well, as we heard, because I think that's the only way we get out of this lower trust environment. And thank you to Ted, Lisa, and Leila, and Jason, and all the other AirMiners team members for pulling this together. Happy to have been here today. Great.
Thank you, Varsha, for your moderating. Again, thank you, Leila. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Ted. And once again, thank you, Carolyn, Tank, and Michael, for all your legwork in the back end to make this happen, and to our operations manager, Deborah Wolf at AirMiners, who also helped make things work on the day of today. I did drop the panelist emails in the chat if you want to take if you have a further question or comment that you want to send along to them. Also, our post-event survey. We want to make our events as best as we can for the purpose of serving you as a community. So any feedback you can provide to us, good, bad, or indifferent, especially ways we can improve, that's what we want to hear. Also, I want to note that our next event is going to take place in 2 weeks. And with that event, we're going to be talking about small mid-sized businesses. We're just looking through some SBTI data from a couple nights ago about the growth of net zero commitments among small mid-sized businesses as reported by SBTI. So really exciting stuff. We want to unearth like what that market segment might look like as a corporate, as a small mid-sized entity buyer of carbon credits, and certainly communicating trust and integrity to those audiences is extremely important as well. So with that, the recording for this event is going to be put up in a couple of days, and hopefully if you missed today's event, or if you want to share it or review what we've learned today, that's when you can take a look at it. It'll be on our AirMiners YouTube channel. Until the next event, though, happy to conclude right now.